Now let's look at a different type of market intervention, controlling quantities. And we see this both when we require licensing for the production of a good or service and import restrictions. A good example of licensing is taxi medallions. In many cities, in order to be able to operate a taxi cab, you have to have a license or a taxi medallion. Now, let's look at the effect of this type of a policy. Suppose we look at the market for taxi cab services, and there's a supply and a demand curve. And at equilibrium at point A, there would be 10,000 miles of taxi services per day produced and consumed at a price of $3 per mile. And this would generate consumer surplus equal to this blue triangle and producer surplus equal to this red triangle. Now, suppose we think there are too many taxis and we reduce the supply of taxis by requiring licensing. In other words, we supply with 80 taxi medallions, which reduces the quantity to 8,000 miles of taxi services per day. And what will be the result of that? Well, if there was only 8,000 miles of taxi services produced per day, then the price would rise up to $3.60 per mile. And producer surplus, for those that get a license, would rise. So producer surplus is going to be this red shape, and anyone producing taxi cab services is going to have higher producer surplus than they did in equilibrium. Consumer surplus is going to be the blue triangle, which is lower because we're paying a higher price for a lower quantity. And we create a deadweight loss equal to this yellow triangle. Another example of controlling quantities are import restrictions. Let's look at a market where we might have import restrictions. This is a case where we have some foreign trade, so we want to differentiate between the domestic supply of a good or a service, and in this example we're looking at sugar, and the total supply for sugar, which is domestic plus foreign production of sugar. So we have domestic supply with a minimum supply price of 26 cents, and when you add in foreign supply also, or foreignly produced sugar, we have a supply curve that's farther to the right. As we see, the minimum supply price is going to be lower at 3 cents. Now, at this equilibrium at point A, we're going to have 360 million pounds of sugar per day at a price of 12 cents per pound. And that's below the minimum supply price for domestic suppliers. So all the sugar is going to be produced by foreign producers, creating U.S. consumer surplus equal to this blue triangle, and foreign producer surplus equal to this red triangle. Suppose we decide that we want our sugar produced by domestic producers. So we ban the import of sugar. What that would mean would be there would be no foreign producers, and the only supply would be the domestic supply curve. If we only had a domestic supply curve, we would have a lower quantity of 160 million pounds of sugar per day at a higher price of 30 cents. What would happen to surpluses? Well, U.S. consumer surplus would shrink. Producer surplus for domestic producers would rise, but the foreign producer surplus would disappear.